This episode of the Conversation Podcast is brought to you by Uniweb.com, your one-stop solution for cutting-edge software development and AI-driven technology. Our guest, Wendy Craft, is a powerhouse in the family office space, having worked with some of the most prominent families in the world. As CEO of Elle Family Office, she manages the Lazarian family holdings, including real estate, exotic cars, various investments, while overseeing governance and generational wealth strategies. Get ready for an insider look at what it really takes to manage a family empire. And if you ever watched Succession and wondered how a real-life family office operates behind the scenes, you're in for a treat. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the high stakes of world wealth management, power dynamics, and legacy planning with someone who truly understands the game. Hi, Wendy.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Wendy Craft. Thank you so much for coming on this podcast.
You're very welcome.
For the audience that doesn't know you, we have an eclectic group of people watching from all over the world. Please explain who you are and tell us about your journey, and then we'll jump in.
Okay, Wendy Craft. I'm currently the CEO of the Lazarian Family Office in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm back and forth between New York and Georgia in the United States, not to be confused with the other Georgia.
Yeah.
I worked in family office for over 20 years. So I worked for a family office in New York City for almost 2 decades. And then a year ago, I took it down here.
Wow.
That's what I do. Does everybody understand what a family office is?
That's the next question I was going to go. But I love it when guests come on and they just skim over decades of life and just say, "This is what I do." We'll get into that. But yes, please explain for the people watching, what is a family office?
So a family office is usually what people who have gathered a great amount of wealth set up. And the reason they set it up is if you have a business, I'll pick on you. You have a business that's booming in the movie industry, and it might not be appropriate for your CFO to be handling investments in fixed income because they might not know how. They know how to be a great CFO, but they don't really know how to do your investments or an insurance portfolio. It's also a confidentiality play. So maybe Bezos, I'll pick on him. Maybe he doesn't want everybody who works at Amazon to know where he's putting his money for investments, what his trusts are, who the beneficiaries are. People will often say, when do I set up a family office? My standard response is that if the check you're handing to your receptionist for charity is more than her whole year's salary, you probably want a family office because she will now hate your guts. And
That's
we
awesome.
we we handle, as a family office, you handle everything. You don't just handle investments, you handle governance of how things run in the family office. You handle the trust, you handle the estates, where all the papers are. It's a lot of doomsday planning, like this person dies, how are we going to function if that person goes down? How does the next gen get their money? Um, there's a lot of planning around legacy for next gens, keeping the story, this is kind of where you come in, the story of the family together. And that's really hard. Your great grandchildren might not really know who you are. So we always advocate for people to do a video when they're young enough of what their vision was, why they accumulated this wealth, who did they hope to help, so that that is preserved through the generations.
That is crazy. You should have them all come on my podcast, by the way.
I know, right? I should. I'll start sending them to you.
That's because it's funny because I've known you for a number of years, and this is so interesting. I had another gentleman on, Kenan Spivak, who was executive at MGM and many, many, many other 500 Fortune companies, and I've known this guy for a long time, and we had this candid conversation like you and I are having, and I learned so much about him as a person in this kind of a candid, nonchalant conversation. So I had an idea what a family office was. It seems to me there's a lot more to it. Wendy, I'll jump into the family office stuff in a second, but where did you grow up and what school did you go to and how did you end up to be where you are now?
Oh, wow. So I grew up in Kalamazoo, Michigan, for those who can find it on a map. and I went to a high school called Lloyd Norrix, went to Kalamazoo College, and then I went to law school and I met my husband, who is from New York. And he didn't want to stay in Michigan, is what he called it. He wanted to go back to New York. So we went back to New York after law school. And then I went down to DC and took a second law degree because I'm kind of obnoxious that way.
What law school did you go to initially?
Oh, initially I went to a school called Cooley, which doesn't really exist anymore. It kind of became part of Western Michigan University. Used to be a great school. Hope it still is. Haven't checked in a while. But to be relevant on the East Coast, I needed some East Coast credentials. So I went and got the second degree, which is a LL.M in tax from Georgetown.
How much time was between the two schools for you? How long did it take you go from one to the other?
Well, I went straight through. So I did
Oh, you
college,
did.
3 years of law school, another law degree. So it was 8 years straight.
Oh my goodness. And then you met your husband in the first law school.
I did. And we got married while we were in law school without jobs.
Good for you.
Yeah, well, our parents thought it was pretty intelligent.
So you went to New York, and you how long was the second round of schooling for you for the law school that you did?
So the second law degree was a year down in DC, and then we went back to New York.
Okay, so when it comes down to when someone for someone who's never done this before, right? Somebody's watching and saying, "Oh, I like what she does. I want to get into that business." What was your journey from the perspective of, okay, I went to law school, you figured out that you needed more credentials. What made you think that? What happened that you thought, I need a second degree?
Well, I knew that I was going to go live on the East Coast, and there's a ton of good law schools here, and I'd be competing in that market with my law degree from Michigan. And I just had a feeling that I was not going to get those interviews or that
Mm.
play. At the time, I didn't know what a family office was. In fact, when somebody told it to me, I'm like, well, I have a family. What are you talking about? Doesn't everybody have a family? Um, and there is no school for family office. So I will say that to people listening who are thinking this is for me. There isn't one. We have fought in the industry, a group of us, for 15 years to get an accredited MBA program. And we finally have a school down in Austin who is
Wow.
looking at a syllabus I just wrote to have it be part of an entrepreneur program so we can have accreditation in the space because everybody falls into family office. There's no career pathway. You could be a wealth manager, you could have your MBA and go family office. It is, you just fall into, you could work for somebody who then sets up a family office and takes you with them. So there's no specific way to do it now. And what we'd like to do, like accountants and lawyers, is actually have a program where you have some accreditation. Ask me on a syllabus, what are the 3 subjects you need for a family office degree? You need law, you need business, and the other third is psychology. For those who have watched
Oh.
Succession,
Are you a big fan of Succession?
it's my nightmare and my laughter. The office I work at now is a dream, but I do know offices that were very similar to that. And I have friends who worked in them. They're still in therapy.
So it's funny because I interviewed Brian Cox's wife, Nicole Ansari Cox. Brian Cox is Succession. He's the guy.
Yeah.
And there was another whole conversation about that. So you think that the folks who wrote that show definitely had an insight?
Oh, they had it down for that end of it, for like maybe the worst end of it. We spend a
Wow.
lot of time here and in other family offices working with our next gens. It's not bad when you have kids, right? It can be, but parents raise children pretty much in the same way. And once you go down to the third gen, they're cousins and they've been raised by different sets of parents. And that's typically where we see the wealth lost, 90% of it. And it's also where we see the fights.
Why do you think that is?
One, you were raised by different sets of parents. So there's an inborn competition that may not be, if done right, your children will get along. Not always, but they have a better shot of getting along than they do at the cousin level. And it's very hard. And 90% of wealth and family offices are lost on the third gen.
Would it be a good idea to add that show to your syllabus?
Oh, well, I think people need to go home and watch it, but you know what? They need to see Trading Places too. Actually, I just had my next gens watch that because they're teenagers. And I said, I want you to have some understanding of commodity trading. That is the best movie for that.
As simple as it gets, right? Something very
It really
basic.
is. Frozen orange juice. There you go.
Just what we've talked about is quite fascinating. So you go to college, you go to two law schools. What happens after the second law school?
For me, I graduated during a glut. It was the only year that Georgetown canceled their job fair in the early 90s. So I ended up going into real estate, which is great because it's led me a career of working with family offices who made their wealth in real estate. And you can make your wealth in anything. But in this case, it led me eventually to a family office
You got real estate as an attorney,
as an attorney.
and then through contacts and business dealings, you built relationships, and they wanted you to be part of their crew rather than everybody else's crew.
Yeah, it's a confidentiality thing. There are different, we have what's called multifamily offices, and there's some really good ones. And they'll take care of multiple families, but some families want that confidentiality and have somebody in-house, either one person in-house as a quarterback or a whole team.
So when you were in this a bit in this your first family office, how long were you in the real estate spectrum? Like how long were you doing that?
Probably about 10 years.
So you did that for 10 years for the same family office.
Nope, I did it throughout the space, happened to get introduced to the family, and they said, here's what we want you to do. And I always knew that there was something above all the wealth in this country. As people run around trying to get this company to invest with them and that company to invest with them, above most of it, there's a family. And I never really understood how many businesses had a family above it that was really making the decisions. You could spend your life trying, as a salesperson, trying to get different companies to use your company. But if you know the family that owns the company you're trying to get, you're in like Flynn.
After real estate, what happened then? How did you develop it, and where did you land after 10 years in real estate?
I ended up working for Kent Swig, and he is a third gen member of the family that started and then sold the Fairmont Hotel chain group.
So you got into hotels and more properties rather than, I mean, it's still real estate, right?
Yeah, it's still real estate. They own a significant amount of real estate in New York City and San Francisco. And then he
Does,
himself was privately involved in other stuff.
how much travel did you do for these jobs?
Well, there's travel and then there's travel, right? It really it depends on what your job is in the family office. So if you're I don't want to pick on anyone in particular, but if you're with a family office and you're in charge of just real estate, you would be traveling around making sure the estate managers are doing their jobs, that kind of thing. Sometimes the families will want you to travel with them so that they can keep doing business. And sometimes families like to go to family office events, which is a whole nother thing. And they want you to escort them, let them know who people are, make sure they're, around the right people, that it's not somebody that's a bad actor or something. Nothing about acting, but somebody who has malicious intent, I would say.
And when you got into this business, men versus women, how many men, was it a dominant men business? Is it an equal balance? How has it changed over the years?
Well, I think primarily it used to be men. And then we had 2008. And in 2008, only one hedge fund had a positive return, and it was run by a woman. And they started looking into psychologically, remember the psychology part, why that fund had a positive return and nobody else did. And what it came down to is that men are more risk takers than women, and women tend on an investment side to do safer investments. So it might not grow as high, but it's not going to disappear on anything risky. And they also found that women did a little better job on the EQ side, the emotional intelligence side, where they could talk to families and get the families to get along and talk to the kids, where a lot of times, and there's a lot of great guys out there, don't get me wrong, that can do this as well. And they do it every day. But a lot of families were like, maybe I want to have a woman there. So it's still predominantly men, but there are a lot of women who are amazing in the C-suite in this office. I mean, it's very intimate, the way that you work with a family office. If you run one, you're in their business. And just, I want you to think about that. What if you had somebody who knew every penny you had, where it was, what was going to happen to it when you died, what your relationship with your spouse was in case some planning had to go around that. It's very intimate. So there's a big bit of trust. and psychology and somebody who can navigate those waters without saying, hey, we're sitting down talking about death today. You have to say, hey, we need to do some estate planning. So it's a lot of feeling your way through it. And women tend to be good at that. Guys are too, but
No, I think you're right. I think you're definitely right. I think guys are great as well, like you said, but I think women have a more of an instinctual, protective thing going on. I think, in my opinion.
very protective. Although I
Yeah.
have some friends that are guys, and you know what? They're pretty fabulous running family offices.
So what is the dynamics without naming any names of when you go to a function where all these family offices show up and all these people show up? What is the dynamic of that world when you guys all come into the same place?
Well, a lot of times we'll have speakers that address things that are problems for all family offices. It could be as simple as, do you do a settlement on the date of marriage or should you do a prenup? If you're going to do a prenup, when should you let your kids know that they're going to have a prenup? And you need to start talking to them about their fiduciary responsibilities as a trustee of their trust. You need to talk to them so that they're not jaded, but they're aware that money might be an issue in friendships and relationships.
Listen, Wendy, what you're telling me, it is such an insight because most of America never thinks about this, what you're talking about.
That is true.
Most of America is just trying to pay rent.
But a
And
huge piece of America in your industry should be thinking about that,
yeah,
as opposed to, and now I'm going to make enemies, as opposed to just having a business manager, because a lot less of them would lose their fortunes if they went the family office route, as opposed to what they do now. And, I've seen it. Like, it makes me very sad where they have huge fortunes that could sustain 7 generations and they just blow it through bad advice. A family office is not going to let you blow it.
is there a check and balance, Wendy, when it comes, for example, let's just say that somebody puts you in charge, you meaning anyone, not just you as Wendy. Is there a check and balance? Is there something that balances out this family office?
Yeah, that's all your governance structures and how that works. Family councils, family office constitutions, family mission statements that I'm putting in place right now. Most families have them. If you do it at the right time, that's there. And maybe we can pick on Johnny Depp. Am I allowed to pick on him?
You can totally pick. I actually have a friend who just produced a movie with Johnny Depp. But go ahead, please. Yeah.
So in his situation, his wealth accumulation was about 500 million. Had he had a proper family office, a lot of that money would have been invested in different places. So if it's invested, you can't just grab it for an estate in France, right? And your family office would have said, oh, estate in France. Okay, what are we doing with the property when you're not there? How can we make income from it? And all those things would have been worked out so that even if he had blown through a certain sum of money, you can't go and take your treasury bonds and cash them in tomorrow if you want. I guess you can, but you can't cash all your investments in. And you do have somebody who's saying to you, look, you made 8% here, this property that's sitting here that's costing you $50,000 a month vacant. That's bad. How can we take that from minus 50 to plus 500,000 a year? So you have somebody always working with you, and their whole job is to look out for you and make sure your financial future stays on even keel and grows. When you're a business manager, you need to keep your client happy. That's your job, to make sure he shows up where he's supposed to go, gets good jobs, and is happy. And so it's an atmosphere of how can I appease you or give you what you want so that you'll keep doing these movies. Whereas a family office is looking 100 years down the road and saying, how can we help you preserve this wealth and grow this wealth and make sure that when you're 90, you have plenty of wealth to sit by the pool and enjoy it. So it's a different attitude. And I wish more musicians, and then I'll get off my stage, musicians and actors would think, once they get in athletes, once they get 100 million, yes, I love my friends. What's the saying? Instead of buying my mom a house, I'm going to buy an apartment building and use the income from the apartment building to buy her a house, because then I still have the apartment building. It's still kicking off income.
So you're saying a business manager does not have checks and balances and they just kind of act on their own perspective and just give an opinion? Is that what that is?
It's a different job. is what it is. They're not bad-hearted people whatsoever, but their commodity is not the client's wealth. Their commodity is the client. So they need to keep the client happy, get the client jobs, get the client where they're supposed to be, keep them out of trouble. That client is their commodity, where the commodity for the family office is the wealth. And we protect the wealth, and we preserve the wealth, and we grow the wealth. And then we have these ancillary things to help improve the lives of the family. So it's two different jobs. I bear them no ill will. That's not their job.
So you're saying if there was something in place of a family office, when an actor or a producer or director, it would be less risk for them in that sense.
They would come out of this at 90 with their wealth intact, have a nice legacy, be able to leave trust, do community good, have a foundation, and do all those things, and still have an amazing lifestyle because what they made would have grown as opposed to being spent on whatever they had. Now, think of it. Think of how many
Mm.
actors you know that have no financial education, right? Which is most of us. They don't really teach that in high school. And you get a windfall. Lottery winner's another one. You don't know how to invest. You don't know all that stuff. And this is not easily accessible unless you call your Ameriprise financial advisor, right? And then that is what it is. So I don't blame anybody for that situation other than lack of education on family offices, which leads us back to there's nowhere to get the education on family offices,
So
right?
this is interesting because you're talking about the education, and when did it dawn on you and I guess your team that this is something that you guys want to do, which is a school or educational platform?
Well, if you hire an accountant, you expect them to have an accounting degree and have taken their boards. Same thing when you hire a lawyer or a doctor. You need the training. A job interview I had way back in the day, and it really was, who do you know? And I'm like, oh, that's the qualification to be in charge of, $1 billion. Who do I know? Um, that's not a good qualification for being hired into Walton or Gates or Bezos family office. Yes, you might have your MBA and you might have a law degree, but what do you know about family office if you haven't done it before? And if you did it before, who's to say you did a good job? Families are very opaque and very confidential. So it's very quiet. It's not like working at IBM where you get your standard letter that's not glowing. And so you know what that means, even though it says you were employed there from, whatever. So it's a very different industry, and it's all on gut. Do I like this person? I'm going to have this person in this intimate relationship with me, and they know my friend. So will this work out well for me? And the answer is a lot of times. There's a lot of very good professionals in the space. And I look at it, the movie Remains of the Day, we're the butlers, right? We make sure everything's okay, and we have a very big sense of pride in what we do, but we are there to serve the family. And there's a lot of people who take that very seriously. And there's also some people that don't. And those are the people that want free private jet rides and can I use your vacation rental? You'll see those people too. So how do you know if you've gotten somebody who's going to be remains of the day or somebody who just wants some free jet time? You don't, unless you know enough people in the industry, you can kind of ask around. And that's not the way it should be. There should be standards.
When do you expect this curriculum and this school ready for, I guess, the public?
Well, we tried for 15 years. We went to all the Ivies, and that's all based on who's done an endowment, and we like you. We don't really want to train the C-suite. What we want is the families to come for a week, and they'll give us an endowment. So that's problematic to get a school to actually do it as an MBA, accredited MBA. So we did find a school, a newer school, and so I'm not going to release their name, but they'll have their MBA program starting in about a year and a half, and they thought they could do a family office track alongside entrepreneurship. So it's a start, right? It's a start. There are a few schools that will give a 3-day certificate or a 3-week certificate. That's like saying, oh, you can manage my money, Mr. Accountant, and take care of my taxes. You went for weekend at blah, 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 right?
No, No, that's crazy to me. Just from experience, I've been to a couple of the events, and just from my perspective, and then correct me if I'm wrong. So I noticed the some of the people that were there. There was a combination of super introspective, like very internal thinking people, and very sleek, very cerebral, but also very shiny and a little cocky. And there was definitely judgments going on in the environment that I was in. And that is something from an outsider coming in and looking at it, and also very fascinated. I noticed some of the stuff that we're talking about film. They were fascinated about it, but I didn't feel that there was an understanding of it. Based on that, what can you share with me?
Well, it depends on a couple of factors how people present themselves. One is how they made their wealth. So if you made your wealth doing something that took a lot of contemplation, maybe writing books, so you're a little less verbose. But if you made your money in something where you had to be verbose, let's say you have 50 John Deere dealerships, and now you're worth a ton of money, you made your money because you were selling, selling, selling. And that's a hard switch to turn off, right? In any environment, it's who they've been raised to be, and they associate that personality trait with their success. So that's who they are. Then you get people down the generation, and this goes to some of the wealthiest families where they've been attacked, maybe not physically, but in the press, on social media. And so they're very quiet about who they are. And they aren't shiny because they don't want people to know who they are, because they haven't had the most positive experience with that. Security is always an issue with these families. The way I tell families is assume there's 500 prisoners on computers looking you up. And so the more you're out there, the easier you are to find, right? And we've had security issues in family office. I can tell you story after story of how those things happen. So as you have greater wealth and you're further down the generational line, you tend to be a little quieter. Second gen is real hard, especially if the parents came from zero wealth and made a great deal of wealth. The thing we hate, and I know you hear this in Hollywood, I just cringe. Do you know who my father is? No, I don't. Do you? How much money do you have? How much do you have? Are you a good saver? I mean, you get the most bizarre questions, and I think that's problematic. People assume because you have wealth, they're entitled to ask any question they want, and you must give them an answer. And think about it. What if I just walked up to you and you just met me over a cocktail? And I'm like, well, how much are you worth? Get out of here. Just go away, right?
Yeah.
We wouldn't do that in any other circumstance. But in those contexts at those events, people sometimes will feel entitled, especially if they're sponsoring one of those events, to just walk up. It doesn't matter what you're worth. I don't invest in quants. So no matter how much I'm worth, I'm not investing in your product. So who cares what I'm worth, right? Because it's never going to happen. So I think even if we don't get the program off, I think that the MBA programs in America need to do a better job of training people how to interact and network with other people. I really do.
Interesting. Now, I know you've done some events in the Middle East, or you're part of events in the Middle East. How is the cultural differences in America versus somewhere in the Middle East where you go and do an event?
I love it over there. I really do. I have some very dear friends over there. Every experience has been incredibly positive. I only had one, which you can find on YouTube, I think, where they decided to have a women's panel, which I don't do anymore. And everybody was laughing. So I got up, I was a moderator, and I had five powerhouse women who were either family principals or CFO. And I decided I wasn't going to talk about being women. I just canned it on the spot. I started talking about where their investments were, how much AUM they invested on, under their umbrella. And by the end, the stage got rushed. And everyone's like, oh, I want to meet you and I want to meet you. And, can we invest with you? And it just changed the dynamic. And that was the only rush spot I ever had. I think it's very nice over there. I will say, no offense to America, that people don't get hit on, like they do in America. And I'll give you an example. I was at a conference and this young, newly minted MBA, he had to be like 24 in his khaki pants and blue blazer, came up to me and I guess figured, I'm an older gal and if he compliments me, I'll write him a check or something. I think that's what was going through his head. So he gives me the elevator eyes and he goes, well, aren't you good looking? And I turned right around and said,
Oh
I'm
my
never going to
God.
write you a check. So am I still cute? And he ran. He just ran. But I will tell you, in the Middle East, that wouldn't have happened. It's much more respectful.
There is a way of investing, which is very upfront in the way you're explaining it. This is what we do, this is how we do it. And then there's a way of investing where they're talking to you as if they're doing you a favor, but the reality is you're doing them a favor. You're bringing them the commodity, you're bringing them the product, you're bringing them the contacts, and they're making all sorts of money on you because you're doing that. How do you decipher that when you come across something like that?
Well, I decide one who's doing the ask. If it's a dear friend and somebody I love and I want to help, I do it. If it's somebody I don't know and they say to me things like, and I've had it said, can I buy your Rolodex? I'm like, no, can I buy your date? Can I buy your date book or your friends and family? Who does that? Um, or
Wow.
you might not want to invest in my deal. How about you send it out to some friends? One, I don't work for you. And two, they wouldn't be my friends if all I did was send them crazy deals. And so again, it goes back to education. And what you do, and I do this a little more now that I'm older, is I'll listen to people and what they're trying to do and what bucket it fits into. There's like 12 asset buckets. I added accidental alternatives on there because a lot of families do those. And I'm like, you should be here. Or if you're trying to raise capital, you should be there. Or you just started up and all you have is 100 grand from your parents. Nobody's going to give you a check yet. You need to do this thing and this thing and this thing. And there are now all these companies that help people with startups and with venture. And there's incubators where they can get, free rent. Luxembourg will now, if you have a space startup, give you a grant to come work on it there. And they have a conference in New York every year to find new space startups. Blue Origin, everybody's there. And it's really cool. So each little piece of this investment universe has a lane. And sometimes they're at the real estate lane trying to sell a biotech. So you just say, maybe you should be over here on this highway and go here, here, and here. And I made friends. There was a LinkedIn post where some guy hadn't talked to him like 10 years. And he listed how he met all these people that led him to where he was today. He posted like a month ago, if you want a giggle. And in the middle is me. And somebody said I had to meet this girl, and she introduced me to this person. And then I met this person, and now I have this huge company.
Wow.
So it makes a difference in people's lives.
Do you see the world that you operate in? Uh, do you see a variety of different types of investments that they do, a diversification of it, so to say, or do you see more of a conservative, very sure bets, kind of investments?
It depends on where you are in your family lineage. So a lot of first gen families are much more of the risk takers because they made that money. They're more riskier with it, or because they made it, they want to go do this, they want to do that. As you get down the generations, it's more, I don't need as high of a return, but I need a safer return. So as we think of our lives where we start doing less risk as we get older in our investments, so do the families as they go down the generations.
You said legacies. You said they want to know their legacies. Being the fly on the wall sometimes, I mean, you're in the room all the time with some of these players. What is their mentality when it comes to legacy? What's their take on, not being in this world anymore and their perspective on it being where they are?
Well, we always want good things, people that, down the line say good things about us, right? And that becomes, think of our presidents, right? What's your legacy going to be? And they try to do some good works there at the end of their term so that their legacy is great. And families do the same thing. They want their name to be in good reputation down the line to their great grandchildren if they're fortunate enough to do that. Where we see a disconnect is with musicians and actors, right?
Mm.
And I've kind of talked to you about this a little bit. They give their kids the best life in the world till they're 18. They get into all the A-list parties. It's a miracle. It's great. They'll even, most cases, send them off to a very good university. But then their attitude is, you need to make it on your own because their passion is their acting and their music. That's what they care about. They want to be on that stage or on that film. And they don't really necessarily care that their great grandchildren, who they'll probably never meet, care about what they stood for in life. Now, families that have family offices, as they get older, they start thinking, yes, I'll probably see my grandchildren. Will I see my great grandchildren? How can I make my wealth last long and grow as more and more people? And now it's two people splitting it, now maybe four, now maybe 23. How do I keep that together? And how do I keep what we stand for as a family together? So those are important issues that we deal with on the family side, but we don't see that usually with athletes, musicians, and actors, although Carlos Santana has gone out of his way to establish a legacy and a good foundation and good work. So it's a broad brush. It doesn't mean everybody.
This is where the psychology that you mentioned comes in.
Mhm.
Some of the things I talk about in my show is mental health, right? Being mentally healthy. Now, there's the one side of the spectrum, which is, like you talked about, the artists, the craziness, the things that happen. Then there's the other side where it's just also I've known people that are very successful, but there's a lack in their life because you're gonna have to give up something to get to that where you need to go. There's a sacrifice along the way that happens. What have you noticed regarding this subject matter that I'm talking about when it comes to some of these wealthy individuals?
I think one of the problems is that sometimes, and it's becoming less so. So remember the Sopranos when they Googled their dad? And of course, you couldn't have done that 20 years before. And they're like, when should we talk to the kids? Well, they already found it on the computer. Kids today can find a lot of this on the computer, where it was much more opaque 30, 40 years ago, right? If we don't talk to the next generation about what their dreams and their hopes and their inspirations are, then they're going to have those issues. And I'll pick on Sam Zell, who I got to do Q&A with on stage. He was fabulous. One of his children was a physics professor. That's what he wanted to do. And Sam was okay with that. He wanted to make sure that he had extra money to buy supplies for the school in Chicago, and that he could have a great lifestyle while pursuing his passion. And I think when parents take that approach, like you might not want to come into the business, hopefully one of the kids will, but you don't have to. You need to find out what's going to make you happy, and we're going to support you, and the wealth will support you to be able to do that. But you have to do something. And the key there is getting to them early. Right? And a lot of us make that mistake. Regular people trying to pay the rent make that mistake. They do things for their kids instead of making them do it. They don't encourage them to work. The best families I've ever seen have made their kids go work, and usually at somebody else's family office or a wealth firm or anything else before they're allowed to come back in and work for the family office. And that's, it's a good thing because they can see different ways of doing things, bring in fresh ideas, and they're working. You don't want them to recreate the wheel. That's why you do have to have a talk with them about what you have and how it's going. But you do need to make them do those kinds of things, because otherwise, although it sounds great to all of us, if you're just laying around on a yacht, then you start making poor decisions to be entertained. Right? That's what happens. And the more you make these poor decisions, the more your life goes away, the more unhappy you are. So you need to contribute, whether it's charity, maybe you want to take the job running the foundation. A good family office staff is going to be involved with the kids, like I am with this families, to kind of see what are your hopes, what are your dreams, how can we bring you in. Maybe, you want to see what it'd be like to be an analyst at somebody else's family office, and I'll get that job for you, but you have to go do the job. The more you can help them fulfill their dreams, the better off they are. And the more that you can intervene when those dreams are not being filled. And, Cayman has a great trust structure. You can cut off heirs if they're being naughty with drugs and that kind of stuff. We need more of that in the United States so that we can, the problem is you will see people do bad things, but they hit bottom eventually. Unfortunately, with the family office, you can't hit bottom. So you have to make sure you intervene early on.
When you say you can't, meaning it is not, it is watched, it is controlled. Is that what you're saying?
It is, but if you have $40 billion, how much drugs do you have to buy before you have none left?
I
Right?
see.
A lot of drugs. That's more than, whatever there is. And if those are held in investments and they have investment advisors or investment counsel and the family counsel, you're not going to get at that. But also, the family is not going to allow you to live in an alley. They will put you in rehab. They'll send you to Switzerland if they don't want the press and put you in rehab there. So the actual hitting rock bottom is not going to occur the way it would for you or I.
So it seems to me there's a safety net there.
Blessing and a curse.
It's a blessing and a curse.
There's a storytelling. And in family office, the storytelling is always a part of our conferences. And it's also, more importantly, how we learn from each other. There is no academics. We only learn from each other's stories.
So Wendy, I mean, the things that you've explained on this show are very interesting and extremely insightful for people who don't know family offices and the journey. And it seems to me that there's still a lot of work to do for people who want to get into this business and going to law school or getting into a curriculum that will teach them the way. And obviously a master's degree in finance is not going to do it. But at the end of the day, what do you suggest for people who are out of college, the steps they should take on a high level to pursue the family office world?
So probably one of the easiest ways to do it, where a majority of people come in, is they'll take their MBA and then they'll go work for a multi-family office. Goldman Sachs has a family office division. Morgan Stanley does. Fidelity does. All of them do. And keep applying, get into one of those. And then when you have the experience, then you apply to go work for a family office. Because most families will not hire you if you don't have family office experience, which begs the question, how do I get it if you won't hire me? But that is an easier way to do it. Plus, you'll have a lot of professionals around you that can guide you and train you and show you how to speak to families. Most importantly, and this is the biggest one, shut up and listen. Just shut up and listen. See how people are interacting. See how they talk to one another and take those as lessons. Most of us didn't have the fortune of having etiquette lessons, but you need to pick that up, and you do that by listening. And you can ask somebody for help. Most people in family office are very kind, and they're willing to give you pointers.
Wendy, I want to thank you for your time. I am very grateful to have you on this podcast.
You're very welcome. I really value your friendship, and thanks for giving me the opportunity.
I love it. We'll talk soon.
Okay, bye.
Okay.